Hello, welcome back to the channel. And for those of you that are new here, my name's Courtney, and in today's episode, I'm going to run through why I am not going to be repaying my student loan. So, let's go. To start with, what's prompted this video? Well, I had a statement recently come through about my student loan balance going up from £49,000 from when I left university about 6-7 years ago to today. It's now around £60,000. And that really prompted the question, should I actually look to overpay this and try and reduce the balance? Or should I just stick with the minimum repayments? So for those of you that are wondering, the first statement wasn't entirely true. Of course, I'll be keeping up with the minimum repayments. These get taken at source. I have no choice about this. But what's actually happening is that my interest is building up at a faster rate than my repayments are taking down the balance. So every year, year upon year, my balance is just going to keep growing and growing and growing and growing. So should I actually be prioritizing some of my money towards paying this down? Well, no. In my mind, and this has always been my belief, I have no intention of clearing that balance. The reason being is that at the end of 30 years from 2017, my balance will be completely wiped. So really the question is, do the overpayments and getting the debt chunked off earlier actually mean that I would save money over the long run? Yes, you've all guessed it. I've created a spreadsheet to run through a couple of different scenarios and the standard scenario to compare whether it's actually worth doing this. So let's jump in and we can talk through it as we go. Glasses first. So to start with, yes, this spreadsheet's a bit rough and ready. It took me a while to actually create this. And I had to really double check my numbers and make sure that they were actually correct. But I believe they are. So let's run through this now and I'll talk you through it, neaten it up as we go. So you'll see in cell B3, so I went for a slightly different cell. In fact, we're going to have to make that B2, aren't we? So roughly, I've got about £60,000 now. So I've just put that in as a rough amount, because although you can do this super accurately, I just want to kind of do this for illustration purposes. A couple of pounds here and there isn't really going to make a difference to the final outcome. So that's my current loan balance. I then have these two amounts. So if I just actually move these across. So this is my interest charged amount, like that. And this is my annual repayment, which effectively works out around 220. I can't remember exactly what I put in, what came out of my bank statement now, but it's around this. It's around the 220 to 250 mark. And to be honest, lowballing this number actually makes the interest worse. So we'll leave it at that. Obviously, what happens is as you earn more money, you pay back more money. So this is based on my most recent payslip, which if you jump back to the last video, you'll see what that was. And it's kind of a hybrid of between, I believe, my initial salary and my salary I'm on now. So it gives a good ballpark if you're looking at this to see whether you should do this yourself or not. So that's the annual repayment. That's the interest charged. If you bear with me a second, I'm just going to tidy this up a little bit actually. So I was going to just talk through it raw like this, but I think if we neaten it up, it will really help illustrate the point. So give me a couple of minutes. Okay, there we go. That took a little bit longer to faff around with, but hopefully it will kind of illustrate sort of what I'm going to talk through now. So to start with, what you'll see is, if I open this out, so from the years of 2017, so the way my student loan repayment plan works is that I believe it's the 1st April from the date you graduated is when you're due to repay. So I graduated in 2016, but the next April is 2017. So that's why I've started this from 2017. My loan is written off after 30 years. So that's why I've put 30 years at the top here, which takes us all the way through to 2046. It's quite frightening actually looking at that and kind of seeing that as the next 30 years of your life. But 2046, at that point, regardless of what the balance is, the loan will be written off and I'll no longer have to make repayments on the loan. So if we quickly jump back to here, this is a very loose average. And to be honest, it doesn't really matter what happened up to 2025, which is where we are now, because the balance is the balance, right? I have about £62,000 of loan at this point in time that I'm going to now consider whether it's worth overpaying or not. So what happened to get to this point doesn't really matter. I put it in for illustration purposes. And actually the only point that does kind of matter, which we'll jump to at a later point, is these numbers here, the actual repayments on what I've made. Again, this is just done as an illustration at today's rate. So previously when I was in lower paying jobs, this amount might be a little bit less. And actually, you know, why don't we chuck that in? Why don't we put, say it was 1,500. We won't do that because it messes up the whole spreadsheet. So what we will do is we will leave this bit static here. And then through to here, let's say I paid 1,500 up to maybe 2023. And then let's say I did about, 2K. And then 2.2 in 2024. I don't know, something like that. You get what I'm trying to do. So it just makes it a little bit more accurate for the complete overview of the next 30 years. So there we go, something like that. But for now, what I'm going to do is just hide this. So we're starting from 2025. Now the top is just going to be minimum repayments. It would be amazing if I could spell at the same time, but we move. So let me just put that in like that. This is going to be the base amount that I'm going to be working with, and in theory, from what I've said, this is effectively going to be what's going to happen. So as you can see, what happens with my student loan is in 2025, I've got a balance of 62k. I'm going to repay 2,640, but the interest that they charge on the loan is 4,440, which from here, they charge 7.4%, I repay 4.4%. So basically what then happens in 2026 is the balance jumps up to 6,380. And that is basically how student loans work if you repay the minimum. Unless you get to a point where you're earning 150, 200k, the interest might flip and you might actually be repaying more. But what happens is as you increase your income, they increase the charge. So let's say my income jumped up to 100 odd K, they would take a higher repayment. So they might take like, I don't know, say 5-6%. I need to read through the specifics, but the interest they charge would jump up to like 9%. So the idea is for middle income earners, you'll always be charged more interest than you will repay, so your loan balance will always grow. And that's why I kind of say that a student loan is more of a wealth tax than anything, in that if you're really wealthy and your parents can afford to pay for you to go to university, you don't have to pay this for the next 30 years of your working life. Whereas if, like me, you aren't necessarily from a privileged background, not saying I'm the worst off by any means, and my parents have always worked hard to provide and give me a good life, so for that I'm grateful, but they couldn't afford to give me 50 grand to go to university, which is the way it is. So I had to take these loans out, and because of that, I now have to pay this for the rest of probably my working career. So that's just how they work. You can disagree, but that is mathematically how they work. And now we'll look to see if overpaying them actually makes sense. So jumping back to the spreadsheet here, what you can see is my balance as I continue to repay the 2,600. Now, what I haven't factored in here is any pay rises, job changes, pay decreases, any of that. This just assumes that for the next 30 years I stay in my current job and I earn exactly the same, not adjusted for inflation. So it is quite a simplistic view, but it's the best way to illustrate the point I'm going to make. So jumping back, the balance keeps going up. So by 2032, I'm up to nearly 80 grand. By 2040, I'm up to 112k. By 2045, I'm up to 50k. But as I mentioned, who actually cares? Because this is one of the only loans that, regardless of what I pay back at the end of 30 years, it gets wiped, right? So it doesn't really matter. Or does it? Let's take a look. So for the purpose of this one, the minimum repayment, what you can see from the spreadsheet is I end up paying back £71,780 on a student loan that started out at about 49k, which, views aside, that is the fact. That's what happens. You end up paying back probably double what you took out. And there's always a thing to remember when you're taking these student loans out is this is the reality. And I'm on student loan plan 2. I think for student loan plan 1, a lot of people, because the balances were lower, student loan fees were only about 3 grand rather than 9 grand per year. When you started to repay, if you basically got a good job straight out of university, your repayments would have been more than the interest. So they trended downwards. So a lot of people on student loan plan 1 probably will just naturally repay these. And it seems to me like the government might not have liked that. So so what they did is change it and basically just flip it. So the fees are ridiculous, and that then means you're just, unless you overpay, in debt. I believe for student loan plan 3 and 4, it's now 40 years, the write-off period. Correct me if I'm wrong. So basically all you need to do is just extend this forecast out another 10 years, and that will be where you'll get to. So you'll just be repaying, an additional, what would that be? Well, we can do it here. 10 years, you'd end up paying another 25k. So you pay back 100k rather than 75, basically. So yeah, that's where we get to. And the total interest that would have been charged over that period is about 200k. Does that make sense? I think so. Yeah, it sums up all of that. So quite a lot, but as you can see, it doesn't really matter because you'll pay back the 71 and then it's written off. So the next part of the spreadsheet, what I did was I've just gone in, and what I've done is calculate the break-even point. So the break-even point is how much more do I need to pay annually to wipe clear the £4,440 interest per month. So what you can see from this calculation is it's £1,800, 2026 is 19,355, so on and so forth. And what I've then done is said, well, actually, I want to reduce this balance, right? There's no point just repaying the break even and keeping my balance the same. I want to get this balance down and see if it's actually feasible to repay it. So if I pay back £200 more on top of this amount, so effectively £2,000 overpayment annually in year 1, that would reduce my balance. Can you believe it? So overall, I'd pay back £4,640 in the year, and that would reduce my balance of my student loan from £62,000 to £61,800. I haven't frozen. I'm just pausing here just to let that sink in. So you pay back nearly £5,000 and you reduce your loan amount by £200. Anyway, so that trend continues, and what I've done, these calculations might be a bit out, but again, they just illustrate the point, is every year I've said, let's overpay by £200 on this difference. That might not be working quite correctly, but I'm not going to edit it now, I can't bother. It illustrates the point. So I'm paying £200 over that break-even point, which, as you can see, by 10 years' time, it comes below the 2K, which is awesome. Keep paying it, until the point that it's written off, because we're not going to keep repaying it anyway. So by doing that, what I've managed to do is, rather than end with a balance of 152K, I've finished with a balance of 57,600, so still haven't paid off, and at that point it gets written off. Okay, cool. But actually, does that really make sense? And I've done another example down here of just a static 2K overpayment per annum. So I'm going to overpay £2,000 regardless, on top of my original 2,640. So again, 4.5K each year extra. That will reduce me down to about 59K. So really, it doesn't make too much difference whether you use the break-even method or just do a static £2,000 per annum. And what effectively that comes out to be is these totals at the end here. So on our original one, we paid back 71K, 152K gets written off. So I don't think that interest is working quite right. Maybe ignore that box. But the bottom line is, I've paid back 71K, everything else gets written off. Here, I will have paid back the 71 plus an additional 43, which means I've paid back 115, and at that point, the 57 gets written off. And a similar story below. Again, 115K repaid, 59 gets written off. So in both scenarios, I've overpaid by £40,000 over the 30 years, which is a huge sum of money. And it has made absolutely no difference to the net end result. What's happened is I've paid the government more money than kept that money in my pocket and used it for something else. Because effectively, when this gets written off, it doesn't matter. These loans don't go on your credit rating. They don't stop you from getting any other forms of debt. No, that's not quite right. They do go in your calculation for like your mortgage and things like that, but what can you do? It's there. So for me, when I looked at that, I was like, why would I bother trying to overpay? Because in all honesty, and we can try this out here. Let's say I went 4,000. Let's do 4,800, which is an extra £400 per month, which realistically, are people going to be able to do that? I don't know. So if I repaid an extra £400 a month, I would clear it by 2037. So I'd clear it in 13 years. So at that point, I could stop paying that. But it would have meant, if I delete that out, it will have meant that overall I'll have repaid £110,000 and saved myself however many years that is of repayment. So yes, it does mean the loan comes off earlier. You save yourself 9 years worth of reductions. But I've cost myself 38 grand to do that, just to reduce deduction. I haven't saved anything. I've spent an extra 40 grand to get it cleared. And it would just get wiped off anyway. So compared to a student that then just wipes his loan out, I am 40 grand worse off. So that's why for me anyway, it doesn't feel worth it. And if you're considering whether you should start overpaying your student loan or not, use this as a guide. It's not financial advice, but this might help guide your decision. And it's why I don't really worry about my student loan. I just let it run. I don't care. Don't even look at it. It's just a deduction I'm going to have to pay. Or is it? Because what you could do with that money, and I've got this up here as an example, is I've gone onto this overpayment calculator. Now, this is my current mortgage, roughly 120k, and I am overpaying £300 a month. So what that means for me is if I stick to this, my mortgage should be cleared by year 12. However, if we look up here at year 8, I have 49k outstanding. So in theory, rather than repaying that loan to the government, which would just get wiped off, I'm probably better off overpaying this more aggressively, right? So let's say I added the additional, what would it be, £200 a month? So let's say I up this to 500, left the student loan running, hit calculate. That means I could be cleared in 9 years on my mortgage, which is awesome, right? And for me, that's where my money will be going, into an asset that will stay with me for the duration of my life, not something that's going to get written off after 30 years. In my mind, what's the point? So that's why I don't overpay my loan, and I don't really care about it too much, and I'm just going to forget it. There is also another lens to this, which is what happens if my income drops, right? What happens if I focus on all of my debts that are not student loan, get all of those cleared, mortgage, everything like that. I invest aggressively in assets that are going to pay me relatively passive income, and then I can reduce my earned income to a point that, because all of my mortgage and everything like that's cleared, I don't need to earn that much. So I could free up my time, maybe work part-time, go contracting, whatever it would be. I wouldn't be repaying my loan. I'd have a lot more time on my hands, and I'd have a lot more financial security. Is that possible? Well, it's something that I will be exploring in later episodes. But for now, hopefully this helps you and helps you understand why I'm definitely not going to be looking to repay my student loan, and I'm just going to let it run. I hope you found this useful, and if you have any questions, please feel free to drop them in the comments. But for now, all that remains to be said is thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.